The official trailer for The Nevers has finally been released, and we're going to put a pin on Joss's behind the scenes drama just for the moment. Although he was officially the showrunner when this thing was created, but he's no longer attached to the show, at least as showrunner. So, what is The Nevers? Well, essentially, it seems to be a supernatural slash superhero drama. I want to be careful with the word supernatural. It does seem like the event, for lack of a better word, that gives these women powers is natural in nature, but knowing Joss, there probably will be a kind of supernatural revelation down the road. So, what to think? Well, at the visual level, it's very, very impressive. I'd say this is actually one of the best looking of any series that Whedon has done, because while Buffy and Angel did look really good, this is really towards the end of their runs because they just didn't have a lot of money at the beginning, so costumes and special effects were always a big problem. The Nevers is far, far better, and the costume and the locations, special effects, all those look really, really well done, and they look really, really professional. And it's a very ambitious cast, whereas Buffy and Angel started with a really small cast and then started to expand outwards. This just has a really big cast to begin with, and I think that's actually the better route. When I think about the better episodes of Angel or Buffy, it's really with the peripheral characters working with the main characters, and so you need a large world for that to work in, and we get that at the very, very beginning. But beyond that, I have to say this is pretty disappointing and fairly uncreative. In fact, even just within the trailer, we're given that, oh, this ex-woman has a kind of prophetic vision and has to prevent a kind of, I guess, really bad apocalyptic future from happening. And if you're familiar with Buffy, that's basically Buffy's story. She's a prophesized chosen one who has to stop the apocalypse, and you're like, okay. And if you know Buffy and Angel, he's done quite a few flashbacks in this kind of Victorian era, and it's interesting enough, in the flashback in those television programs, they try to be very accurate, but here it's the complete opposite. This is really just a fantasy creation of England, and clearly it's not true to that time period, because just the cast of characters, it's really radically unlikely that they would work together during this time period. So it's actually borrowing perhaps a little bit more from the X-Men, which Joss wrote as well, and just mashing it up with some of the thoughts and premises he's worked with prior to this. So from a creative angle, this isn't really him stretching, he's just really going back and just displacing the time period slightly, but this really just seems like a different version of Buffy. And even the basic premise is something they already did with the later seasons of Buffy. Instead of like one woman with extraordinary power, now we have just a ton of women with extraordinary power, and presumably we're just going to go into their stories and how they have to choose between the good and bad side, and they're facing a kind of oppressive patriarchal force who we already got a hint of. And again, if you know Buffy, we already had that with the Watchers. So if you're a really Joss Whedon fanatic, you're going to be like, okay, yeah, we've done virtually everything in this all before, and it doesn't seem to be a particularly new slant. In fact, if anything, it's just borrowing old stuff, but with better technology. Still, even so, there's nothing wrong with going back to an old story and telling it again. It just doesn't seem like there's that much new. The only interesting new stuff was that it seems to be a much more multi-racial, multicultural, and even multi-gender kind of cast, because we already get hints that homosexuality and bisexuality is being embraced, where it kind of took a long time for Buffy or Angel to sort of allow, for lack of a better word, the queer characters to be queer publicly. And this is sort of just being much more forceful and outright about that. So it's a very weird show at the very get-go, because you could look at it two ways. You can say it's kind of like the better parts of Buffy and Angel, and they're getting to the good stuff. But I suspect it's kind of the obvious that this is a kind of very derivative project he has had in his head, and we're getting, quote, the good stuff, like the large cast, the intriguing adventures, all this kind of stuff, multi-character work and all that, more out of necessity than choice, because there may not just frankly be more in Whedon's bag of tricks. This is something I found with a lot of his more mature films, is that he's kind of getting into a repetitious cycle where he's just doing the same stuff over and over and over again. Whatever we think about Justice League, it just feels like a kind of faded version of Avengers. And Avengers itself kind of feels like just a certain version of Angel or Buffy with their kind of team dynamic and found family theme. So it's sort of like, Now, that's nothing wrong. I've noticed this as myself as a writer. I do my own writing as well, and I noticed this too, that I sort of seem to get back into certain themes over and over again and just keep repeating myself. But I'm sort of conscious and self-aware of that and try not to replicate each fiction as the last one. But this seems to be the opposite. So if you kind of know Whedon stuff already, we've kind of been here before. What I find really fascinating is this is more at the science fiction level. It but it doesn't have any of the creativity or zaniness that Firefly did. Also, a lot that's missing is the sense of humor, right? Whedon, even with the dark stuff, has pretty interesting sense of humor. That's really kind of missing from this whole trailer. And of course, another notorious absence is even mentioning him, because usually you're always going to see something from the mind of Joss Whedon, produced by Joss Whedon, that's completely just been cut out. So I'm not very impressed by the trailer itself. It looks great, and I might be wrong in that it is great, but it feels like it really is just a fancier version of stuff we've seen before. If you're into the later seasons, that's perfectly fine. I think the later seasons of Angel are excellent and really powerful, but the later seasons of Buffy, on the other hand, really show a sharp decline, and even the last season, which I like a lot, is basically at best above average, but measured to its better seasons, kind of a real drop in quality. And then we're going to have to get into the inevitable ethical, political, social impact of the show and whether we can or should support it given what's happened with Joss. And so it's not looking good for the Nevers. I guess if you're okay with superficial superhero stuff, this is for you. If you want something more substantive or deeper or creative, which is what characterized his past work, this is probably going to be a disappointment. And that's what we can see at the very beginning. But these are initial thoughts. I'll do more probing and analysis of the mythos and the story and what is good and bad about it. But I'm seeing more bad than good at the moment. All right, these have been initial thoughts on the trailer for The Nevers by HBO and executive produced, or was executive produced, by Joss Whedon. Thanks for listening.